Hello guys, how are you? So today we're gonna talk about the ethical analysis of the gas tanker accident in Iztapalapa. People who are in this team are Arturo Aguirre, Nenet Astorga, Beatriz Carrillo, Andrea Castaneda, and me, Daniel Amador. Before we start, we need to talk about the table of content. So, firstly, we have the introduction and then we have the case overview. After that, we're gonna have some key stakeholders and then the ethical analysis and then the corrective actions. And then we're gonna have 3 recommendations, and after that we're gonna have the conclusion. And to finish, we're gonna have the references that we use to make this project. So we're gonna talk about the tragedy that left 25 people dead in Iztapalapa in September 2025. In 2025 in Iztapalapa in Mexico City, an accident occurred that caused and deep depressed throughout the country. Gas tanker overturned on a main avenue in the borough at the time when the area was very busy with local residents. What happened? The streets in the area were in poor condition, and although citizens had reported this to the authorities long ago, the authorities ignored them. All this caused the driver of the gas tanker, which belonged to Silsa SADCB, to lose control. The tanker, which contained a large amount of toxic and highly flammable gas. People were trying to run for their lives, but in most cases it was not possible, as the explosion was so strong that they died in that moment, and the few survivors suffered permanent burns. This caused outrage, not only in the area but throughout the country, as there were no medicines or equipment available to treat these cases of extreme burns. Since it occurred in an area where economic resources are limited, many people died due to lack of medical care. Adding to the negligence, the hospitals in area had poor hygiene, as most of them had cockroaches and rats, causing people to also die from infections in their wounds. So, as a thesis statement, this case illustrates how the government disregard for public health infrastructure maintained constitute a grave ethical transgression that directly violates the basic duty to safeguard public safety and human life.
Case overview. In September of 2025 in Iztapalapa, Mexico City, a gas tanker overturned on a main avenue in the borough at a time when the area was very busy with local residents. The streets in the area were in poor condition, and although citizens had already reported this to the authorities, they ignored them. The truck was traveling at a speed that wasn't permitted by the local streets nor the size of the truck, which caused the truck to flip on its side. When it flipped, it caused leaking of a type of gas called LPG, known to expand quickly to its heaviness against the air. This began to spread quickly, and people started to run for their lives. A few seconds later, the reversible happened. A spark leading from the truck's engine caused the ignition of gas to explode. Explosion details. The speed and tip over caused leaking of a type of gas called LPG, like it was mentioned before. A spark leading from the truck's engine caused the ignition of the gas. This caused a massive explosion that reached more than 100 feet in flames. Impact. The tanker, which contained a huge amount of toxic and highly flammable gas, collapsed and caused massive exposure in the area. The explosion was so strong that people died instantly, and the few survivors suffered permanent burns. Ethical issues. Number 1. The rejection of safety compliance by the organization. Number 2, Gas Silsa as an official organization fails to maintain safe standards transporting dangerous and hazardous materials. And number 3, there were not any safety conditions on the equipment whatsoever.
Now, to fully understand this strategy, we need to examine 3 primary stakeholder groups whose actions or inactions played critical roles in what unfolded. First, let's take a look at Grupo Tomsa, operating under the Silva brand. This is a major liquefied petroleum gas distributor with significant economic power and a substantial resource at their disposal. Despite their financial capacity and their market position, they systematically failed to meet even basic safety standards. They operated unsafe vehicles, neglected proper maintenance procedures, and also provided inadequate training to their drivers, as well as choosing not to install critical safety equipment like speed limiters and GPS tracking systems. These weren't accidental oversights. These were deliberate cost-saving decisions that prioritized short-term profits over human lives. Second, we have the regulatory agencies, which is ASIA, meaning Agencia de Seguridad, Energía y Ambiente, and the Ministry of Energy. These organizations possess high authority and are specifically tasked with ensuring public safety in the energy sector. However, they catastrophically failed to meet their monitoring and enforcement responsibilities. They allowed thousands of LPG trucks to operate daily without proper safety equipment, also failed to conduct adequate inspections, and didn't establish a meaningful accountability mechanism for companies like Silsa. Their regulatory failure wasn't limited to this one company. It created a nationwide systemic risk affecting millions of citizens. And finally, but most tragically, we have the Iztapalapa community residents. These individuals had low formal power in the system, no voice in corporate or regulatory decisions, and became the ultimate victim of this systemic negligence. They trusted that the trucks operating in their neighborhood were safe, the companies weren't following regulations, and that their government was protecting them. That trust was betrayed in the most devastating way possible. These power imbalances reveal a disturbing reality. Vulnerable populations consistently bear the great consequence when corporations and regulators prioritize economic efficiency. So now we're going to be reviewing the utilitarian analysis. Utilitarianism evaluates actions based on whether they maximize overall well-being for the greatest number of people. Silsa gained higher short-term profits by operating without proper safety equipment and basic maintenance procedures. They avoided costs associated with the regulatory compliance and safety investments. However, the social costs were catastrophic. 25 deaths, 90 serious injuries with permanent burns, vehicles caught fire, thousands of properties destroyed, and extensive psychological trauma for survivors, family, and the community. A proper utilitarian analysis revealed the problem. The forensic investigations found that the accident was caused by human error due to the inadequate training protocols and the absence of basic safety equipment. The truck was traveling at approximately 45 kilometers per hour when it rounded a curve, with all mechanical systems functioning correctly. Additionally, federal regulators acknowledged that thousands of liquefied petroleum gas trucks operated without speed limiters and the GPS tracking systems daily throughout Mexico. This creates widespread unacceptable risk exposure for millions of citizens throughout the nation. So, from a utilitarian perspective, these decisions were fundamentally unethical because they prioritized minimal regulatory burdens and operational efficiencies over protecting innocent individuals from a catastrophic consequence. Now we're going to look at this case from a deontological perspective. Deontological ethics focuses on duties, rights, and moral obligations, independent of outcomes. Every Iztapalapa resident possessed a fundamental right to safety from industrial hazards. This right was systematically violated by those responsible for protecting it. Silsa had a non-negotiable duty to protect the public when transporting such hazardous materials through populated areas. Operating without proper insurance demonstrated a disregard for the human dignity and treated community members as expendables in pursuit of economic objectives. Government regulatory agencies had an equal duty to enforce safety standards and protect citizens from corporate negligence. They failed through inadequate inspections and absent enforcement mechanisms. Significantly, after this disaster, authorities implemented a 13-point safety plan, including mandatory speed limiters, GPS tracking, and driver certifications. So this implementation implicitly acknowledges that previous policies were ethically deficient or they were denied. So, from a deontological perspective, this case represented a fundamental moral failure because essential duties were violated and basic human rights were disregarded all along.
Decision-making model, plus framework, policies, laws, universal principles, self-reflection. Purpose, eliminate safety hazards and building long-term ethical protections. Key findings and corrective actions. Policy gaps, no mandatory speed limiters, GPS tracking, or LPG driver training. New legislations requiring safety protocols, quarterly inspections, real-time monitoring, maintenance logs, and internal safety committees. Legal gaps, inadequate insurance rules, no executive liability weak oversight, mandatory high coverage insurance, criminal liability for negligent executives, expanded ASEA authority, stronger penalties, and an industry-funded victim compensation fund. Universal principles, uphold dignity, justice, and environmental justice. Community safety briefings, emergency drills, communication with regulators, infrastructure upgrades, and enhanced protections for disadvantaged areas. Corrective action. 13-point safety plan, speed limiters, GPS with geofencing, annual NSCCL driver certification, National Hazardous Materials Transportation Safety Board, independent investigations plus public safety records database, emergency response system, burn treatment centers, medical supply chain, multi-agency response protocols. Utilitarian effectiveness, reduces accidents and fatalities, improves training and reduces human error incidents, strengthens emergency care, decreasing mortality and long-term disability. Compensation fund provides immediate financial relief and reduces suffering. Deontological effectiveness, respects human dignity and treats communities as ends, not means. Establishes personal accountability for negligent executives, prioritizes citizen safety over corporate interests through stronger oversight, ensures public transparency and equal protection for disadvantaged communities.
Now we have the 3 recommendations developed from our ethical analysis of the Iztapalapa gas tanker accident. The first recommendation is the creation of National Digital Safety Registry. This registry would collect information on vehicle maintenance, driver certifications, and company compliance records. Having all this data in one system would help regulators identify unsafe practices much earlier and monitor companies more effectively. Research shows that when safety information is clear and accessible, compliance improves and overall risk decreases. This recommendation strengthens long-term oversight and increases protection for the public. The second recommendation is the development of a unified emergency response program. In the Iztapalapa case, the slow response showed a major gap in coordination between transportation companies, hospitals, local governments, and federal agencies. A unified program would allow these groups to communicate and act more quickly during hazardous materials incidents. Studies on public safety show that coordination systems reduce preventable injuries and improve readiness in high-risk areas. This recommendation supports more equal protection for communities and helps prevent additional harm. The third recommendation is to require annual ethics accreditation for executives who oversee hazardous materials operations. Leadership decisions contributed directly to the unsafe practices that existed before the accident. Regular ethics training helps leaders understand their safety responsibilities and the impact their decisions have on communities. By increasing ethical responsibility at the leadership level, this recommendation strengthens accountability and supports safer organizational practices. Together, these 3 recommendations address the key failures in oversight, emergency planning, and leadership that contributed to the tragedy, and they provide a clear path toward preventing similar incidents in the future. The Iztapalapa gas tanker accident revealed serious failures in safety management, government oversight, and protection of vulnerable communities. The ethical analysis showed that the neglect from both the transportation company and the regulatory agencies allowed preventable risks to remain until they are resulted into a major tragedy. The use of the PLUS model helped identify the gaps that needed correction by strengthening safety standards, reinforcing legal accountability and improving coordination during emergencies. The recommendations further support these improvements by promoting transparency, faster response systems, and stronger ethical responsibility among organizational leaders. Overall, this case demonstrates the need for consistent ethical decision-making and effective oversight to prevent similar incidents and safeguard public safety in the future.
Thank you so much for paying attention, and here you have our references.